I call this meeting of Central Florida Facilitators, Toastmasters Club 9958 to order. Thank you for being here tonight. If you have phones, please remember to turn them off. At Toastmasters, we provide a supportive and positive learning experience in which members are empowered to develop communication and leadership skills, resulting in greater self-confidence and personal growth. Through this mission, each Toastmaster gains a clear understanding of the club's purpose, and the organization as a whole benefits from a shared set of values and goals. Please help me welcome our thought and pledge leader for this evening. It's Toni G.
I thought I would celebrate Gail tonight for stepping out of the box and introducing us to a new format, which I've not seen over the last 11 years that I've been a Toastmaster. I know there was some controversy about the topic, about how the debate should run. Some people maybe didn't come. Who knows? So here's a quote from General Douglas MacArthur. Nobody grows old by merely living a number of years. People grow old by deserting their ideals. You are as young as your faith, as old as your doubt, as young as your self-confidence, as old as your fear, as young as your hope, as old as your despair. Please stand as I lead the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. With faith, self-confidence, and hope, we continue with our meeting as I introduce Jonathan Dunn, our president.
Feels different. Fellow Toastmasters, honored guests, it's an incredibly exciting evening, and I have a really important announcement to make. To lead us off, we're changing the name of the club. Fortunately, we get to keep CFF. We're now referred to as the Champion Florida Facilitators. If you had been at the contest on Sunday, you would have seen a virtuoso performance by this young man, the likes of which I've never seen anything like. It was fantastic. And we will, that leads me to the next bit of news, Mark and I will be representing our club at the Party of the Century, which is November 14th through the 16th. Mary Carol Holbert mentioned the $119 early bird rate will carry on till basically the end of this month. If you need one of these and you would like to go, get with me at some point during this meeting. When you sign up to attend the conference, you get lots of great goodies. Free meals, free booze. It's a bargain. I don't know how they're doing it at that price, but they are, so let's take advantage of it. And since we have a lot of new people tonight at Champion Florida Facilitators,
Oh dear.
we need to go ahead and talk about why we are called that. We are sponsored by the Central Florida chapter of the American Society of Training and Development, the premier organization for professional facilitators, open to everybody. A good facilitator needs to be a strong communicator and an effective leader, and fortunately, that's what Toastmasters is all about. Facilitation means to make things easy and possible, and we want to make things easy and possible for each and every one of you. We obviously have a brand new format this evening. I'm super excited to see it for myself. We're going to launch right into it. With over 16 years as a Toastmaster, Gail has experienced many Toastmaster meetings, projects, and developments for herself, as well as the hundreds of Toastmasters that she knows. Tonight, she wanted to challenge not only herself as a meeting Toastmaster, but to extend such a challenge to the speakers, evaluators, and functionaries, and created this debate forum to accommodate the levels of the speakers' skills and knowledge. Gail hopes you enjoy what has come together as the Great Debate. Please welcome distinguished Toastmaster Gail Hill-Smith.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Yes, this was quite fun, and I'm so glad to see so many guests with us. If you could stand up and just briefly introduce yourself, what club you are, or if you're a guest, and just let us know how you heard about this and sort of why you came before we get into the meat of the topic. So why don't we start with Bob Grassoff, way in the back.
Gail's guest. She wanted to make sure that we filled the room, so I'm here representing that fill. Thank you. Kim Ricky, I live down the street, so I thought I'd stop by.
Sure.
Michelle Bedloff, and I just thought I would check out the new Champions Florida facilitator.
Michelle is with the Articulators and ACE, and are you a member of the Word Club? No?
Dave Barrett, FIS Orlando Toastmasters. Michelle told me about it, and to think that we would have a debate anywhere, I just wanted to come here and see what's going on.
And then one of our speakers. I will have an introduction for him, but Reid, do you want to stand up and take out? And how did he hear about it? He was strong-armed at a party Saturday. Be a partier. Okay, let us take charge of this format that I hope will be a model for other debates. As has been alluded to, it's not really a debate per se, because our speakers are actually speaking from manuals that do cater to a debate concept and meet some of the objectives. You will see on your agenda the manuals that they are going to be speaking from. Their evaluators will be evaluating them. And if our speakers have not given their manuals to the evaluators, I will, who's doing it? Reid's? You have a manual?
Fortunately, I was more concentrated on preparing the speech in 24 hours.
Okay. Good. So Linda, you'll pull out your talent on evaluations and give Reid a great evaluation. Now tonight, with the four speakers, they were all told they would have 6 to 8 minutes to speak from, even though their manuals might cite differently. But from a moderating standpoint, to give equal time to both opposing teams, we just allocated 6 to 8 minutes. We are not having table topics tonight. However, you will see on the agenda that the first team that speaks, which we will determine in a moment, they will have 2 to 4 minutes to close and followed by the second team. So our timer was prepared to do that. two members that are for the topic are Sarah and Stephen. So Stephen, by a toss of the coin, we are going to determine which team starts first, hence which team will start the 2 to 4 minute tabletop, if you will, at the end. And then the evaluators will be evaluated accordingly. So heads wins. What do you want to call? Heads will start.
I think you just called it.
Well, what do you?
Heads is fine.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So Stephen and Sarah will start our debate. And we will start, did you determine if you were going to start? Sarah is going to start, and then between Reid is going to be our second speaker, Stephen will be our third speaker, Mark will be our fourth speaker. And then the 2 to 4 minute, somebody from either Stephen or Sarah will take that 2 to 4 minute slot at the end, and that team
How
will
many
take.
minutes is the first one?
For all speeches are 6 to 8 minutes,
Is this 2 to 4 question and answer or just statements?
and 2 to 4 minutes at the end is just the statements. To persuade. Okay, now we haven't finished the debate explanation. Our functionaries are involved with here. Susan, even though I just did give the times, do you want to tell everybody what you're going to be doing?
One of the skills Toastmasters practice is expressing a thought within a specific time. As timer, I am responsible for monitoring the time of each speaker in each meeting segment. I will operate the timing lights, indicating to each speaker how long he or she has been speaking. For our prepared speeches, to qualify for voting, speakers must speak not less than 30 seconds under their range minimum and not more than 30 seconds over their range maximum. That would be 6 for the green, 7 for the yellow, and 8 for the red. And for our evaluations, they are disqualified if they go 31 seconds over. Oh, wait a minute, I missed that. For evaluations to qualify, evaluators must speak a minimum of 1 minute 30 seconds and a maximum of 3 minutes and 30 seconds. And they will see the green light at 2 minutes, the yellow light at 2.5, and red at 3. And that is what I'll be doing this evening, Madam Toastmaster.
Our odd counter, excuse me, yes, our odd counter, Michonne Severo, has a slightly different question to ask our speakers in your role.
My job is to keep track of audible crutches such as ah, and double crutches, which is the repetition of a word while the speaker thinks of their next word. I will also note sentences strung together with bridge words like and or so. I will repeat at the end of the meeting where I mention all these infractions. I will sound the buzzer, or try to, when I hear any of these infractions. The buzzer is not to embarrass the speaker, only to give immediate feedback. It may also stimulate an ability to get past distractions that invariably occur during the speech. Guests and members who have not yet given their icebreaker speech are not normally buzzed. The fine for each infraction is 10 cents. Guests and speakers who have not given their icebreaker speech will not be fined, but I will keep track of their infractions to help them improve their speaking knowledge.
Now, we do want to give the prerogative to our speakers if you want an audible buzzer or not. You're good? 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 All right. So for everybody?
Everyone said yes.
None. Okay.
Trying to stay battery life.
And our next functionary, our supervisor of elections is Jonathan Dunn. He too has a slightly different role. Jonathan.
Thank you, Madam Toastmaster. As the vote counter, I will pick up your ballots for Best Speaker, Best Evaluator, and the Most Improved Speaker. I will be tallying the results for award presentations at the end of the meeting. I will also be picking up any comments you might have written for any of the speakers or meeting participants. I will be delivering the comments to the appropriate person. And in addition, I believe I have gotten a for or against slip to everyone. If I have overlooked you, please raise your hand at this point and I will come and deliver it to you. How do you feel before the debaters debate? And once I finish my little spiel here, because I believe I have them all, you're going to fill one out after all of the speakers have spoken and notify me basically if you've changed your position. If you've changed your position. Thank you, Madam Toastmaster.
Unfortunately, one of our Toastmaster guests, Michelle Detloff, she is our grammarian this evening. You want to tell us the word of the day?
On your agendas, you have the word of the day. Word of the day is toxin. Toxic, which means pertaining to, affected with, or caused by a toxin or poison. It can also mean acting as or having the effect of a poison, such as, don't we all have those toxic people in our lives that you wish would just go away? Please try to use the word of the day, toxin, or toxic. I'm sorry, toxic, as if you are called to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Now, typically in a debate, a moderator bounces or poses questions, and each presenter will speak to that topic. Unfortunately, Toastmasters doesn't allow that, and they're all speaking, obviously, to the same topic. So with that said, I am going to read our speakers' introductions right now, and then we will start with Sarah, followed by Reid, followed by Stephen, ending with Mark, and then, who did you say would be the 2 to 4 minute spokesperson? On Stephen? You, and then Reid. Great. All right. So, our first speaker this evening. How do you care for your loved ones when it comes to their health and well-being? There's a lot of information that can be difficult to sift through when it comes to aligning our personal beliefs to research that posing controversy. This speaker will help you with those questions by making a focus area that must not be neglected: vaccinations. Speaking from her public relation manual, help me welcome Sarah Hunt.
I'm sorry, can we remove those, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
It's 1925. One cold winter day, a terrible thing happened in Nome, Alaska. 2 children got very sick. Their parents called the doctor. He was the only doctor in the whole town. When the doctor saw the children, he was very worried. The children had a terrible sickness. It was called diphtheria. The doctor did not have the medicine he needed. Without the medicine, the children would die. Without the medicine, many other people in Nome would get diphtheria and die too. Thank goodness we don't live in 1925 or 1825, when medicines were in their early infancy. Are all vaccinations needed? Let's examine the definition of needed. It's requiring something that is essential. We're blessed with a baby, a newborn. There are many things we prepare to get ready. We buy them posh clothes, lots of books and toys, and they're not exactly essential. Food, shelter, loving parents, that's essential, and their health is absolutely essential, and that's where vaccinations are vital. One of the biggest successes in the medical field today are the development of numerous vaccines. Let me share with you two main reasons why vaccines are of critical importance. First, the immediate benefit is the individual immunity. When I had my first child, I was never prepared for that first visit. I thought I had lots of things prepared, but the shots, the vaccines, you've heard, who does it hurt the most, the parent or the child? I had that thought, is there a toxin, something toxic in my baby? There is a weakened pathogen that is made up of this vaccine that is in a person's body. But then the antibodies that form, they protect that baby, that child. And there can seem to be a lot. We have a lot of illnesses in this world today. Many are life-threatening. Those antibodies, they hang out, they're like watchdogs. What peace of mind that we have that protection for our children. The second is called herd immunity, or sometimes known as community immunity. That's referring to the protection offered to everyone in the community. For example, not everyone, but say 90% of the population had a particular vaccine, then those that didn't get it by choice, maybe by the fact they've got a chronic illness, or they are a newborn, they couldn't take it, they're also protected. I have two examples that show what happens when the majority of the population is not vaccinated. In England, back in 1998, the measles went on the decline. People stopped getting the vaccination. That herd immunity, the population, more than 90% dropped to lower than 80%. Measles started popping up, 56 cases. 10 years later, in 2008, 1,348 people getting measles. This was something that disappeared and now was on the rise. Another example is in 1990 in Philadelphia. Two fundamental church groups, they don't believe in vaccinating their children. They believe prayer will heal their children. Again, measles outbreak. That happens. It's called the disappeared disease. We don't look at our neighbors, we go to school. Measles and other different types of diseases are not prevalent today because of these vaccinations. They do work, but we cannot let our guard down and get lax. That leads me into two more points that I know many people struggle with. When the intention is off of something to cure because these vaccinations protect us, all of a sudden, where is our attention? When we question these vaccines now, we all like our freedom. And that's one of the problems. People like to make their own choices. No one will require my children to get a vaccine. I don't believe in it. And we try to play doctor, and I've done that, thinking I know a lot, when really I've not been part of that process and the experiments and all the approvals that any vaccine has to go through. So we think we know everything, and we don't. We need to be told what to do, and we have to put faith in the medical community. I had referenced the antibodies, they're hanging out like watchdogs. Would any of you ever leave your apartment or your home, door wide open, windows wide open? Every day you do this when you leave your house. What may happen? You may be vulnerable. Maybe an invader comes into that home. So every day when we leave, we close our door, our windows, our garage, maybe some of you have a security alarm. We protect our homes. Our body, the children's bodies, we treat that. We should treat that like their house. And we protect it through vaccinations. Studies show over and over how beneficial this has been because we see less disease. The second area that can be struggling for many are those harmful effects we hear about. There can be some side effects, not life-threatening, but wow, you get some celebrity that goes on the airwaves. My son is autistic because of vaccinations. And all the attention, they're really believable. And they're not doctors. There's no medical research to show that. And there was one British physician, bloody British, what are we going to do with ourselves, published something, an article, that there was a possibility that autism could be linked to vaccinations because the rise of autism was correlating with new vaccines at the time. But since then, a study has shown that is not the case. That was published in The Lancet. I talked about the many layers that are needed, and some of this was from lawsuits that popped up in the 70s. Damages were awarded for potential harmful effects, even though no scientific evidence showed that at all. But it did do some good. Congress passed the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act in '86. Let me list some of these agencies. We have Department of Health and Human Services, Center for Disease Control, FDA approval, lots of agencies, the Institute of Medicine, all of that part of the review process. Extensive laboratory tests. There is a big fortress around this vaccination topic. It's not like going into Walgreens and I have a headache and I go get a tablet and I'm self-prescribing what I think I need. Those doctors regulate this very closely. And any harmful effects that get reported back to the pediatrician's office, by law, have to go straight back to reporting purposes. To close, my book of Balto, he was actually a dog that saves the day. It's a true story. The statue's in New York City. It ends with the town being saved. But we have to be brave, and we have to trust that vaccinations do work. Thank you.
If you want to take a moment, a minute, write some comments on that perforated sheet on your table, Sarah. They'll be collected later at the end. Our second speaker indicates it's been 27 years since his Toastmasters high school debate career and last formal debate. Armed to the teeth with numbers and statistics and passion for this debate question, he can't wait to dive in tonight to divulge the toxins within the topic of children's vaccinations. Help me welcome Master Debater Reid Manchester.
Tonight, I want to remind you of three words. When we were growing up, we were all taught these three words, politely, but we may not be using them today. Tonight, I want to remind you to use these words in a way you've never used them before, with a certain level of fervor that you have not yet expressed. Those words are, no thank you. I'm not one for a lot of statistics. In fact, I was never any good at math as a kid. I don't want to bore you. What I do want to do tonight is impress upon you some of the most important realities behind vaccinations. We want to talk about the big picture and some common sense. Common sense is something we're all born with, but we seem to be lacking today in the choice around vaccinations. Do you know that the vaccinations today are controlled by both the FDA and the CDC, federal organizations? Can anybody at this moment think of any federal disasters that have been made by any federal organization? Here's a couple of examples. FEMA took 5 days to get water to those poor people after Katrina. 5 days! That's a 20-minute flight! Bernie Madoff, former president and CEO of NASDAQ, was convicted of the largest fraud in history, in American history. The US tax code is 74,000 pages long. And the EZ 1040 tax return is 41 pages of instructions. Can you tell me how any of these things make our federal agencies look competent? And most recently, look at what they've done with Veterans Affairs. You know what the FDA really stands for? Federal dumbasses. Not only are they dumb, but they're corrupt. But let's first talk about how dumb they are. Have you ever heard of a drug called ractopamine? No, you haven't. You know why? It's being buried. Ours is the only country in this nation, in the world, that allows the injection of our cattle with ractopamine, which is a growth hormone. It has known links to cancer. Other countries will not import American beef. It is banned. Doesn't that sound like something that the FDA maybe should have said, we're not going to allow ractopamine in our beef? Clearly something's amiss here. Aspartame was developed in '65. Aspartame somehow passed FDA approval despite several panels of experts who explained that there were definite discrepancies in the medical research done for that drug. It is now perhaps estimated by the naturopathic groups as the most damaging food additive on the planet. Truvia and Purevia, you may have heard, as stevia sweeteners. You'd think healthy, safe, made of a plant. Neither of these products are natural at all. In fact, they're mostly not stevia. The FDA approved them and allows the marketing of these products as natural products. To me, that smacks of both incompetence and corruption. America, seemingly, is a land of opportunity and is looked upon by all the nations on this pedestal of cleanliness and well-organization. The truth is, we're as corrupt as African nations. The problem is, it's not transparent. The CDC really stands for completely and disgustingly corrupt. Efficacy rates for the flu vaccine are actually, when you look at independent studies, not run by drug companies, 9% for senior citizens, 9% efficacy, and 50% for the rest of us. Thank you, but no. I think I will chance getting the flu. There are other ways to prevent yourself and your family from getting dangerous diseases. Washing your hands, don't touch your eyes, eat proper vegetables, not GMO vegetables. And that vaccine only covers one strain. By getting vaccinated, you actually increase that virus's ability to mutate into other strains. And what do you need then? More vaccines, more profits for the big pharmaceutical companies. The CDC allows these big pharmaceutical companies to run their own studies and publish them and promote them. When we take public funds and study the efficacy of these drugs, we find that they are no more effective than covering your mouth when you sneeze. Japan, in the 80s, had mandatory flu vaccinations. They since gave that up after they'd spent a lot of government money to figure out, are we getting our money's worth out of these vaccines? They discovered they had zero effect whatsoever on the flu. Today, flu vaccines in Japan, completely optional. Most people don't take them. Big pharmaceutical companies have a huge conflict of interest with the CDC. Do you know what happens when you're an executive at the CDC? You retire, and you go and work as a consultant to one of the big pharmaceutical companies, as the previous president of Merck did some years ago. 7 years at CDC, now heading up as a director for Merck, former switched up. Let's talk about some common sense. Rubella is one of the injections that's made into our children today. Whooping cough, polio, tetanus, diphtheria, rotavirus, mumps. Less than 100 people in the last 25 years have died from these. Does anyone here, raise your hand if you know anyone who's died or had one of these illnesses? In the 1980s, from age 0 to 6, children were given 7 vaccines across 5 shots. Now, 12 vaccines in 26 shots, with up to 5 shots at a time. The incidence in the 80s of autism, 1 in 10,000. The incidence of autism today is estimated at 1 in 50 and climbing. If you can't see a correlation here, if you think it's a good idea to vaccinate your children, I think you need to get your head checked first. This is clearly evidence of a toxic drug. This is my friend's son, Lucas. I want you to remember this. He was injected at age 2. He pulled away halfway through the injection. The nurse insisted on administering the full injection over again. You cannot tell me that look at this child, that he could get 1.5 vaccinations and be completely ruined for life, stuck at a maturity level of 2 years old, but 1 dose is okay? Let me tell you, when I talk to my friend Louis, his father, and see the pain in his eyes when he knows that his son will never be older than 2 years old, even when he's 80, I would never vaccinate my children and accept whatever the CDC and big pharmaceutical companies tell me. I want you to stand up when it comes time and exercise those words, thank you, but no.
Thank you. But yes, please give us a minute on the clock. Write some comments for Reid. Our third speaker this evening, Sarah's teammate, is Stephen Morgan. In his 16 years in Toastmasters, Stephen has been a member of 6 different clubs and has competed in over 150 speech contests. He has been programming computers since he was 10 years old, and he earned a National Merit Scholarship to the University of Florida, where he received his Bachelor of Science in Engineering Science and his Master of Science in Computer Engineering. Presenting his speech titled Real Knowledge, please welcome Advanced Toastmaster Gold, Stephen Morgan.
Real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance, said Confucius. We've heard a lot a bit here about common sense, not a whole lot per se about the topic at hand, which was, are there too many vaccines? We were hearing a lot about should we be doing vaccinations at all. And you've heard very little about numbers or the statistics or the reasons why any of these things are done at all. But for an example, there's the question of, have you heard of anyone who has had rubella in the past however many years? That's because the rubella vaccine was introduced in the mid-60s. Before the rubella vaccine was introduced, in the years from 62 to 65, 12.5 million people caught it. Before the polio vaccine, in the United States, over 16,000 people would catch it a year, and almost 2,000 of them died. And before the smallpox vaccine was introduced, annually we were having over 48,000 cases, and 1,500 were dying. Do you know anyone who has caught any of these diseases? One person. Good. The rest of you have not. A few. Good. Why haven't the rest of you heard of any? How did we get rid of smallpox in the first place? There was brought up about the flu vaccine, the efficacy. It is not 100%. In fact, it is, for as far as vaccines go, fairly low. That is true. Thankfully, flu is not as bad as many of the other diseases that are out there. No vaccine is perfect. It is, in fact, impossible for any vaccine to be 100% effective. There are always going to be a few outliers, whether by genetics or environment, who will not be able to take the vaccine or for whom it will not work. In fact, my wife is an example. She had gotten chickenpox several times in her life because the way her biology is, those viruses just keep coming through. The flu vaccine happens to mutate very quickly, and there are a lot of strains that are out there. The CDC, when they're actually asking for the vaccines to be developed each year, they are analyzing strains that are moving around the globe, and they choose various ones, hoping to choose the right ones that will happen to hit here, and there are several that are actually in the vaccine. When they actually come around, sometimes they get it right, and sometimes they get it wrong. But as it so happens, there is an efficacy, and it does help some people. Yes, it's a question of whether you think that one will help. But if it's a matter of being laid up for a few days, that might be a different question versus whether or not your child is going to be put in amongst a whole bunch of other children who might not be vaccinated and perhaps along a much worse disease such as polio. Since the debate question originally was, are there too many vaccines? I'll tell you a little bit on this. There was an estimate that had been brought up. Do multiple vaccines overwhelm the immune system of an infant? And there are several, there are actually 8 people involved in this particular paper, and I'm certainly happy to provide. A rather conservative estimate made on a few suppositions in there. They actually believe that an infant would be able to handle vaccines simultaneously 10,000. We only take about 26 shots right now. But aside from that, it was brought up that we take 26 shots now versus the 2 to 7 or so that were done in the past. But let's break this down a little bit more, because what we get now is not the same thing we got in the past. Whereas before, particularly the pertussis virus, the whooping cough, you used to get pretty much the entire virus payload was inside the shot. Now instead of the entire payload, there's only a few bits that are in there. Those bits are what our immune system needs to latch onto to be able to attack the virus when it comes in, so we only provide those few bits. As a result, whereas back in 1980, we were being given approximately 3,000 antigens throughout all the shots that you were vaccinated. Today, you're getting about 120. You're getting vaccinated against more diseases, or our children are, but they are actually being asked, their immune system, to handle less. They can certainly handle a whole lot more. Brought up the autism link, and this was brought up by Andrew Wakefield, was the British, get this, gastroenterologist. Yeah, he works with the gut. He happened to come across a few people who he saw they had irritated intestines. That's his field. He came up with this idea that since some of them were autistic, that somehow the irritated intestine caused toxins to flow into the blood, which then went to the brain and caused autism. Mind you, he has no training in brain chemistry. He was a gastroenterologist. And as it turned out, the Lancet eventually apologized for publishing his work, and it was noted by the Times of London that he had not disclosed his own claims to vaccine litigation, and that they are now suggesting he even fabricated his data. The Institute of Medicine here in the United States did do studies on this. They do not have direct ties to any pharmaceutical companies. They do receive money, but they have no influence on the people who are on the committees. They don't know who's on the committees, in fact. They found throughout several studies that have been made, and there have been a lot of studies, there's no influence between any of those from the vaccines to autism. Now, one connection that has been made over the years has been thimerosal, which was inside many of the vaccines, helping to maintain their longevity for the last one. It has mercury in it, and that was the concern, mercury being toxic. Thimerosal, once this was recognized, actually, the U.S. government said, pull it out. It hasn't been in any of the vaccines since 2001. However, autism rates have not gone down. Here we are many years later, and the autism rates have actually seems to be going up. So clearly, thimerosal is not directly related. However, the claims to the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, there are 4 times as many autism cases as non-autism cases. These are the things that we are facing. But I'm going to point out one other particular thing. The Dunning-Kruger effect. This is the concept that incompetent people, if you're incompetent, you can't know you're incompetent. The skills you need to produce a right answer are exactly the skills you need to recognize what a right answer is. And here in the United States, where we have a very strong desire to elevate the narcissistic and the people who are extremely confident to know that because they're confident, they must know what they're talking about. And yet when you go and listen to the scientists, they're talking about there are errors. There's a margin of error. We think there's a connection. This evidence shows it. They can't be sure. They can't be definitive because that's not the way science works. But if you get up and sit there and you talk very strongly about your opinion, you can say, I am right. And so many people go, oh, you must be right. But in fact, you are incompetent. So let's go back to one more thing in history. Benjamin Franklin. And something he wrote. In 1736, I lost one of my sons, a fine boy of 4 years old, by the smallpox. So this I mention for the sake of parents. Get them inoculated. Because from his example, showing that the regret will be the same either way, if they die from the inoculation or if they die from the disease. Therefore, choose the safer path.
Thank you, Stephen. Susan, if we could have a minute on that clock, you can turn that red light off and turn on again. That'd be great. You'll write your comments for Stephen, please. And we'll collect those along with the others in just a few moments. Thank you. Our fourth speaker, teammate of Reid Manchester's, Mark Lockridge. After tonight, he writes, he will need to complete one more speech to achieve his competent communicator distinction. both ends. And he is ready for a nice relaxing vacation poolside with his wife and his doctor, Dr. Peppa. But before he rests, he just has one more stop to make, exit 350A in Jacksonville for the District 84 Conference Humorous Speech Contest. Help me welcome to the lectern, Mark Lockrady.
Thank you, Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters and guests. Are all vaccines needed? The simple answer to that is no. And I don't have one reason to tell you that. I have 21.5 billion reasons to tell you that. The Wall Street Journal reported in 2012 that manufacturers of vaccines are poised to make $21.5 billion annually. Wow, $21.5 billion annually. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, and it's a lot of shots. Government mandated shots. By the time a child is a year and a half, he or she would have received 38 injections of drugs from our government. That's a lot of drugs. And it doesn't matter if the child is physically large or physically small. The dosage is the same regardless. And that's a scary thought in itself. So, thank God all these drugs are safe and secure. Why are they safe? Because the government tells us they're safe. Our government. The same government that brought us, if you like your health care plan, you can keep your health care plan. The same government that said, we're not spying on you. The same government that said Benghazi was started by a nasty YouTube video. If it had been any other government, I wouldn't trust them. But since that's our government, I trust them. And if the government will lie about things like that, why wouldn't they lie about a $21.5 billion a year industry? And if you don't think they'll lie about that, consider this. In 1990, a sergeant in the Marines stationed over in Saudi Arabia was told by his commanding officer to go over to sickbay and get an anthrax vaccination, which he did because he was told to do. 6 months later, when he returned to the States, he noticed the shot wasn't in his shot record. So he went over to the Naval Hospital and he asked the very same person that administered the shot, how come that shot's not in my record? And the medic asked him, what shot? And the Marine said, the anthrax vaccination you gave me in Saudi Arabia. And the medic looked that Marine directly in the eyes and said, I never gave you a shot. How can you trust government? Now, I'm not going to stand up here and bash the government because we're all taught that if you don't believe in the government, you're an anarchist or you're a conspiracy theorist. I'm just trying to prove the point that my parents taught me. If you can't trust somebody to be truthful 100% of the time, how do you know when to trust them? But the drugs are tested though, right? They have to be tested. Consider this. In 2003, Congressman Dan Burton had a congressional hearing with the then acting director of the FDA. And he had concerns about a drug called thimerosal. You heard about it a little previously. Does anyone know what thimerosal is? Okay, we'll try this. Has anybody heard of mercury? Well, thimerosal is mercury. One of the deadliest known natural things to the human body. And it still exists in vaccines today. And I watched the hearing, and I have a transcript here of a particular question Congressman Burton asked the FDA director. He said, has thimerosal ever been tested by our health agency? And this was Mr. Egan's reply. He was the director at that time. His reply was, well, it's been only in those early tests that you know of that were done by Lilly. So the congressman followed up with a second question. And when was that test done? And this was Mr. Egan's reply. 1929. 1929. One of the most deadliest natural elements known to the human body, and the only time it was tested with its reaction to the human body was in 1929. That's crazy. That's crazy in today's society. So, we can't trust what the government tells us. And we can't trust that the FDA is doing all they can to test these drugs adequately. And my colleague earlier pointed out the conflicts of interest and the corruption within the CDC. But you say, wait, Mark, there's data. I've seen reports, and there's no adverse effects about vaccinations. Well, consider this. Now, 2 months ago, in August 2014, William Thompson, PhD, one of the senior scientists at the CDC, officially became a whistleblower and went on record and made a public statement that said the CDC had willingly and intentionally omitted data from some of their earlier published reports. Wow. It was in direct relationship to thimerosal and the MMR vaccine. They actually had data that suggested if African American babies were injected with the MMR vaccine before the age of 36 months, they had an increased risk of developing autism. And he stated on the record, we just decided to leave that out of the report. So if you can't trust what they say, and you can't trust what they do, and you can't trust what you read, how do you know what to trust? You have to trust yourselves. You have to become educated. Don't rely, somebody up here earlier said you have to be told what to do. Do not rely on being told what to do, because I've proven they're not truthful and they're not always going to look out for you. Remember, this is a $21.5 billion a year industry. As for me, my decision was made in 1990 when my government injected me with an anthrax vaccine and then later looked me in the eye and denied giving it to me. Madam Toastmaster.
If we could have one last minute to write some comments. And wow, that passion that Mark just exuded, I'm sweating more than you. Thank you, Mark. The final segment of our debate, the next 2 to 4 minutes, will be our first presenting team for closing comments. Please welcome Stephen Morgan back to the lectern.
I don't know about the rest of you, I've heard a lot of bashing of the federal government today. Not that they don't deserve it at times, that's for darn sure. Pretty much every elected official deserves it, and a lot. But I'm going to point out a couple of things. The reference about Big Pharma making a lot of money off the vaccines. They might, but let's suggest something else. A hospitalization for measles will cost you today probably about $140,000. Of that, maybe what, fifth would go to prescription drugs or whatever you're going to get pumped into at that time. So about $28,000 will go to the pharmaceutical industry. Some portion of that will be profit. How much does it cost you for the vaccine? $20? And the insurance covers it? How much do you think they're making on that? In fact, it seems that Big Pharma would have a much bigger stake in actually having us stop taking the vaccines, so that the diseases would pop up more, we'd get hospitalized more, we'd need more drugs, and they'd make more money. Maybe that's a reason the debate doesn't go away. Maybe we should follow that money and see where it leads. It is true that vaccines do have side effects. Never said that they didn't. In fact, many of them do have various side effects which are small in nature, or at least small likelihood in nature. One of those, conjugate meningococcal, one of the diseases. One of the possible effects from getting the vaccination is actually Guillain-Barré syndrome. It can happen about 1 in a million chances. However, don't take the vaccine and you have about a 1 in 100,000 chance of actually catching the disease, which would likely be much worse. 10 times the odds that it could be worse. So if you're going to play the odds, get vaccinated. If you don't, go play the lottery. Now I'll point out to you, though, we've been hammering on the federal government, and I haven't been stating that the federal government's been behind any of these particular things. I should point out, it's not the feds that are telling you to go get vaccinated, or to tell your children to go get vaccinated. It's the state governments and the school boards who say your children must be vaccinated to go into school. It's not a dictate from the federal government. In fact, several states have exemptions for people who have a philosophical or other such reason to not get vaccinated. And by the way, the incidences of these diseases are higher in those states. It's all a game, and it's all a game of odds. Life is a game of odds. Which odds are you going to play? Are you going to take the roll of the dice and just say, you know what, I'm going to go freewheeling and hope that I can roll and hit the jackpot? Or are you going to put some insurance down and go, I'm going to cut my odds of things going bad down? For me, for my children, for society, so that we all have a better chance for a better future. And if you want your children unvaccinated coming into my child's school, no thank you.
And our second team, Reid Manchester, will have his team's closing statements.
I think one thing that the opposition and I and our team can agree on is that we as parents are responsible for protecting our children. We can all agree with that. We differ on how we expect to handle that responsibility of protection. Stephen is correct when he says that vaccines are responsible for the reduction in incidence of all of these deadly viruses of the past. That's irrefutable. He's also correct when he says, I failed to address the topic at hand, that are all vaccines necessary? So let me correct that right now. Did you know that an infant in their vaccination set receives a vaccine against human papillomavirus? This is a sexually transmitted disease. Do you know why they give that? The reasoning that the medical establishment gives us for administering this vaccine is that it's too hard to get children to take the vaccine in their teen years. How long is a vaccine stable for inside our bodies? 6 years. What do you think the value is in injecting an infant with a sexually transmitted disease vaccine that only lasts 6 years? I'd like to ask our competition, are your children under the age of 6 sexually active? Because we have a much larger problem at stake here, I think, if that's the case. There's only one explanation for such an activity, and that is greed and corruption. There's no other explanation. In closing, we'd like to say, we're not saying don't vaccinate your children at all. We're saying exercise your right to get educated, to pick and choose the vaccines that make sense from the manufacturers that have proven through studies that are independent to have strong efficacy. So we do want you to say no thank you, but say no thank you with educated perspective. Thank you.
Can you join me with a huge round of applause for our I don't know about you, but I sure enjoyed this. Can we have a timer's report on how our speakers spoke within their 6 to 8 minute allotment?
Sarah spoke for 8 minutes and 23 seconds in our first section, so she qualifies. Reid had 8 minutes and 25 seconds, so he qualified. Stephen was 8 minutes and 33 seconds, so he didn't qualify. And Mark Lockery, 7 minutes and 16 seconds, he did qualify. And then for the 3 to 4 minute, Stephen spoke 3 minutes and 32 seconds, so he qualifies. And Reid spoke 2 minutes and 26 seconds, so he qualifies.
Great, thank you. If you would like to cast a vote for who you thought was our best presenter this evening, but in addition, Jonathan, did you hand out the
Yes.
second?
I did. I handed it out and I plan on collecting it when I go around.
Okay, because we are curious if this presentation changed your perspective or your view of children's vaccinations. The next portion of our meeting is our evaluations. And for our guests, this is an opportunity for all of us to learn, but specifically for our speakers to learn how they might improve and what techniques and what skills they exemplify and are strengthened. Our general evaluator is who will lead us in this part. And I'd like to read a little bit about our general evaluator this evening. Except for a brief exposure to Toastmasters in 1968, Ted Allman has been a member of You Talking to Me Toastmasters since last April. His career includes computer programming, systems engineering, and teaching. He writes for Edit International Inc. and is currently editing a physics book, Einstein's Intuition. Whoa. Ted has raised 6 kids, cherishes 17 grandchildren, and dotes over 2 great-grandsons. He's a founding member of the Fort Lauderdale Center for Inquiry and is president of the Coalition for Advancement of Science Education, both 501c3s. Help welcome to the lectern our general evaluator this evening, Ted Allman.
Well, our evaluators have a real challenge tonight. I've heard excellent speeches within the confines of the manual. And yet they made some very persuasive arguments. I gotta admit, I sat there vacillating. I hope you had a clearer picture of which to ask you to report. So our first evaluation will be from Toni G. She has a background in healthcare, teaching, management, caregiving, writing, public speaking, and relationship coaching. Toni is also a former ballroom dance performer. She has been a Toastmaster for 11 years. Today she will utilize her Toastmaster skills to evaluate speech and share.
It's 2014, one warm fall day in Altamont Springs. 17 Toastmasters show up for the great debate. As it turns out, a very complex question is being debated. Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters and guests, and especially Sarah, I love the way you took control of the audience. You had a prop, you used it, you walked out in front, and you made a statement. And that introduced your topic very, very well. My life experience regarding vaccinations revolves around life in the 1950s through the 1980s. So it's very old thinking. However, back then, there was no question about getting a vaccination. Also, in my young adulthood, I met two women who had polio, who were not exposed to the vaccine, and who had polio the rest of their lives. Also, as an audiologist in the 80s, I tested approximately 100 rubella children with varying degrees of hearing loss, mostly severe, visual impairment, and delayed development. So I agree with you. There was no changing my opinion, even though it's an old thought. What I realized, however, from listening to all the speakers, which were incredibly excellent, was that there's a lot going on today that I didn't even know about. But what you did was present some of the very, I think, basic arguments. You talked about the individual protection as well as the community protection. And that's an argument that's been around for a long time. You also brought up a couple of reasons that people maybe not want to participate in evaluations. The way that you did this, however, was very personal and very easy to understand, because you used an analogy with locking your home and protecting yourself. You made everything very easy to understand through your language, the way you articulated it, your organization, and speaking of the manual project, you fulfilled all of your objectives in persuasion, using the persuasion technique. So I really appreciated that. There were a couple of areas where if I were to give you a vaccination right now, I would inject you with the following. It would have a little more passion and a little more enthusiasm for your viewpoint. Perhaps it would be in more vocal variety, but just the way you express yourself, and Mark was a good example of that. Also, I believe you ran out of time at the end, so your closing was short, but you didn't quit. You brought the book out and you said the town was saved. I think there was a little bit more to the story that might have been valuable in wrapping up your argument. Also, really a summary. This is a complex topic. There's a lot of detailed information here. There was some good research. I like going back and looking at the epidemics and how people are safe because of the vaccinations. So that was a great job. Overall, I thought you were very confident in your presentation and your argument. You were sincere, you were assured, you're a mother, maybe a little bit more personal stories that shows the positives of getting your children vaccinated. Amanda, Mr. General Evaluator.
Linda Knowles has been working on the evaluation she's about to deliver. So you can be the judge. She aspires to inspire speakers to excel. She Evaluations, Reid M. Please welcome.
Toastmasters and guests, and especially Reid, who is also a guest. We appreciate your participation tonight. There was many compelling questions tonight, and presented, I should say, that really made a big difference in how I looked at the topic. I thought it was much more cut and dry. I enjoyed the way you presented the information. It was sincere and forceful, and everything you said, I was with you. You carried it through your structure excellently. Excellent opening with the 3 words that you brought through the whole presentation. And the middle part was very interesting. I thought it went a teeny bit long on the bringing our attention to questioning in general with the different government agencies. A little more time for the emotional appeal at the end, I think, would have been more effective. The emotional appeal really was an excellent way to close, and if I had a tiny bit more information, not that I didn't believe everything you said, but with a little bit more information so that I really understood the story, and I think that would have really had a lot of impact. I don't know if you were wondering, another compelling question is we had red, white, and blue all over the place on our written material and across our tables, and so it was a tough thing to stick with the government questioning. But you did it excellently. I've never questioned my government more than I do right now. And I enjoyed it every second of it. Excellent. And I enjoyed the phrases that you used at the end, something's amiss. And it had a purpose to it because we were questioning the whole idea of who chose this and should we buy. I thought that everything you said was bringing me to a decision point, and the emotional appeal when you chose to do it was perfect. So again, I repeated that, but your structure was very good. Everything pulled together for an ending that was very compelling. You didn't quite push me over the edge, but I have to say, I am so glad that I'm a grown-up and I have no children, so I don't have to make that choice. Thank you so much.
Most important part of any evaluation: 1, giving the speaker your undivided attention. 2, identify the main idea of the speech. Who are listening to the debate, try to come up with responses, questions, and retorts that you might use to feedback later. Were there any supporting remarks that could be made clearer? 3, evaluate the content of the speech. What was the main argument of the speech? Was the content clear and well articulated? Did the speaker prove the point? Our next evaluator will For our next evaluator, this will be a challenge to help the speaker in his next speech. Please help me welcome Charlie Baumler.
Mr. General Evaluator, fellow Toastmasters, and of course, Stephen. One thing for sure, there was no toxic of your speech. What I heard you saying, basically your main idea, was that this is a gamble, as life is, and you're going to take the side of the vaccination. Definitely a clear, understood point that you made. You were very clear in your assessment, and you backed each and every one of them with facts, which is very hard to do it in some areas. Your points flowed logically back, and again, by supporting data. Your speech masked the solid content and had a smooth flow. You were very professionally looking, like you always are. You commanded attention from everyone as you stepped out here and you looked at every single person. You eyeballed everyone. That was a very good point in your speech. You also had great voice. You were very smooth, very clear, crystal clear, in fact. I like the fact that you started your speech with knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. Very powerful opening. You came absolutely packed with statistics. The only suggestion that I may make is that I believe at times you may have bombarded us with facts one after the other. That it's just too hard to comprehend. Maybe there's me, but they were really shooting out there, especially with all these different types of diseases that are coming out. In your closing statement, you emphasized the point that if I'm going to gamble my life, I'm going to throw the dice on the side of being safer on vaccination. And you made that constantly through your whole speech, time and time again. A very solid speech. And I have to tell you, Stephen, your speech consisted of authenticity, great research, and very emotional at times. And I saw you that you sometimes don't express a lot of emotion, but you did today. And you were very factual on everything. I commend you for an excellent speech.
There's no role in Toastmasters meeting that our next evaluator doesn't consider of great importance for improving communication interest rates, even though she tries to hide her data types. And whenever assigning roles as a VPE, she saves the easiest for herself. Micki is devoted and enthusiastic Toastmaster. Evaluating is a difficult role for her, but debating, in her opinion, is worse. So, of course, she chose the former. I cannot imagine a toxic word coming out of her small baby. Please help me welcome Micki, who is going to evaluate Mark.
I'd like to start with reminding you the objectives of Mark's speech tonight. Persuade listeners to adopt your viewpoint and ideas to take some action, appeal to audience's interests, use logic and emotion to support your position, to avoid using notes. And what a great job Mark did tonight. Mark, I am for vaccinations, but you picked my attentions with choosing the middle way. Not all vaccinations, not all vaccines are necessary. So I started to think, well, maybe he's right. We live in a society and we need to protect ourselves and protect people around us from diseases. But on the other hand, we have to keep in mind other interests, like the example that you gave us, and was the financial interests of the big pharmaceutical companies, like $28.5 billion in profit. You continue to build your case with showing how unreliable the government is. And I have to mention this, I love your humor. And it was a very wise statement that you made. If you cannot trust someone to be truthful all the time, how do you know when to trust them? That was a wonderful point. In general, your speech was very well organized and the message was very powerful. You used powerful words, and you had a great body language. You had visual contact with everybody in the audience, and you didn't use notes. Congratulations. This is not an easy one, especially when the speech is longer than 5 minutes. What I liked the most was the conclusion. It was such a powerful conclusion. After building our feelings against vaccinations, you mentioned that he was the Marine given that shot and light in the face. Yes, that made it personal, and what could be more powerful, more persuasive than a personal story? Thank you.
They didn't seem to be to me. Our times are Toni was 3 minutes and 15 seconds, she qualifies. Linda, 2 minutes and 39 seconds, she qualifies. Charlie, 3 minutes and 9 seconds, he qualifies. And Micki, 2 minutes and 45, and she qualifies. So all our evaluators qualify for voting.
Thank you so much. This has been an unusual format. I think it went really well. I think if any club can pull off such an alternate format, I've come to respect this club somewhat. And as such, I've chosen to add my membership. You haven't forced me. Well, I suppose we could have the participants perform on skateboard or something. No, I really don't. I'm overwhelmed at professionalism. We have excellent speakers. Even the evaluations were very succinct and showed a great deal of thought and contemplation. I think it was a great meeting.
Very good. Well, thank you, Ted. Thank you, Ted. Our vote counter this evening took a poll. I have the results of that poll and hence have awards for our speakers and the team that was most influential. Are you ready? Is there a drum roll? Before the meeting, 10 of you voted for the question. Two of you voted against the question.
Meaning no?
Against the question. After the presentation, there was a slight change. 8 of you were for, and 4 of you were against. So our most influential team was Reid and Mark with the A team. These are, I tried to find brain washers, but came close to it. These are belly washers. They're 100% pure juice. There's no added toxins, chemicals, etc. So Scooby-Doos go to our second team. Thank you so much. I really had lots of fun putting this together. It certainly wasn't perfect. Would love your feedback, how we can improve it, layout of the meeting, the times for the speakers, maybe a slight change in our evaluations, send me some feedback. As you're doing that, if you will, go ahead and cast your vote for the most improved Toastmaster this evening in your eyes. And our vote counter, who is also our president, I would like to have him come back to the podium or lectern to wrap up our meeting. Because, well, Jonathan, let me ask you this.
Yes.
Do you want me to ask for the functionary reports, or would you like to?
You, please. That would be
Okay, while you're
wonderful.
gathering. Then on that note, Michelle, what do you have as our grammarian?
I think because of the technical nature of the topic, it brought out a lot of really good vocabulary, such as pathogens, fervor, outliers, efficacy, suppositions. Sarah, I really appreciated the analogy about comparing our bodies to our homes. It's a great analogy. And of course, also the antibodies, like watchdogs, with a little British posh clothes. We don't say posh here. It's totally English. It was very cute. Thank you. And the person who is going to get the phrase of the evening is going to the articulators, Reid Manchester, federal dumbass. We will never be able to understand or remember what FDA really stands for anymore. Thank you. Who's going to use the word of the day? Sarah, Gail, Reid, Steve, Charlie, Ted, and Susan. Thank you.
And Michelle, how about our all-counter report?
Gail, you had 2 so's. Reid, you had 2 us. Ted had 1 so. Toni, you had 1 and 2 ums. Linda, 2 us. And then Micki, you had 1 and 1 minute.
Okay, I'll put that in the kitty. I think that's it. Will you help welcome our president, Jonathan Dunn, back to us?
One more round of applause for Gail for putting that. I have to admit, I thought it was a lame topic, but I changed my vote on that too.
Well, no, Charlie thought it was lame. You just didn't think it had any spice.
I was so hoping we're going to pick marijuana. We've got a lot of decorations that are up this evening that aren't normally up, so if you would help us break down the room at the end, we always appreciate a team effort. We actually have every single role filled next week outside of vote counter. We know that won't be a problem. Granted, there's only 2 speakers currently listed in Gail and Jorge. Is there anybody else that would like to speak while I'm up here? And if not, we are going to launch into the awards. May we get a drum roll, please? Tim Chastain Award for going above and beyond the call of duty. That's going to go to Gail this evening.
Change my name in the government now. I'm Gail Hill. Thank you.
Most improved. Another surprise award winner this evening. It's going to go to our very own Stephen Morgan. In second place. Our best evaluator this evening. Bionic woman Toni G. last, the Best Speaker Award. I thought you guys were all awesome. It's going to go to a man that's on a roll, Mark Lockery. And a funny sidebar, we're running a little bit behind schedule. They had typoed his name on the program on Sunday for the humorous speech, and they had spelled it L-A-U-G-H, Lafferty. It was like a blessing. There's a lot of guests here tonight. A lot of you are already Toastmasters. We'd love to hear from you after the meeting what you thought of our club. We'd love for you to join us again in the future, but we'll do that after the meeting. Are there any announcements I need to make before I adjourn this? Yes, Michelle. Oh yes, gosh, I feel ashamed. Go ahead, Michelle.
Monday night, there is an open house for the ACE Advanced Club. If you are either near or have already achieved your Competent Communication Manual Competent Communicator and would like to look into an advanced club, please join us. I sent an email, I think, to Jonathan, and he can forward it to the members.
I've already done it. I've already done it.
Have you?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
But we'd love to
Okay.
see you, and if you have any questions, let me know after the meeting.
Any other announcements? Yes, Toni.
I'm sure Gail already did this, but Reid, thank you for participating, and I really want to acknowledge the speakers, because this was A++ program, and I think just a lot of people were surprised how well it went, but it started with you guys doing the work and showing up and giving your presentation. So, and Gail, yeah, congratulations, amazing.
I second that. Any other announcements? Okay. In that case, the meeting is adjourned.